We all know that Vancouver is one of Canada's most desirable cities, from its breathtaking natural surroundings to the urban amenities, all the way down to the ideal temperate climate. There's so much that Vancouver has going for it, although I do know it's not for everyone. But if you're thinking of moving to Vancouver, this is a video you absolutely cannot miss, because this is a video that's going to help you avoid some of the most drastic mistakes that I've seen people make. These are 7 things that you need to know before moving to Vancouver. Let's get into it right now. My name is Sebastian Albrecht with the Living in Vancouver, BC team, and welcome back to the channel. I'm so happy that you're here. If you're new here, this channel is all about moving to and living in Vancouver. I put out videos just like this one every single week, and this week we're getting deep into a topic all about 7 things that you're going to wish you knew before moving to Vancouver. And this is going to honestly save you all sorts of hassle and all sorts of trouble. The first thing that we're going to get into is make sure that you understand that the city of Vancouver is just one small part of Metro Vancouver. And when many people think of Vancouver, when they say that they live in Vancouver, what they really often mean is they actually live in one of the many municipalities that surround Vancouver, that's part of the region. Now, let me explain. Metro Vancouver is the region that most of us think about when we think about Vancouver. And in that area, there's almost 3.1 million people. And that entire region, let me get this right, is 2,879 square kilometers. Right now in 2024, they estimate that we have 3,069,910 people, not 11. And in that area, there are 21 municipalities. Yes, you heard that right. 21 different municipalities make up the Metro Vancouver area. Now, in contrast, the city of Vancouver is only 115 square kilometers. That is just 4% of the area of Metro Vancouver. I mean, that blows my mind that it is that small in comparison to all of Metro Vancouver. And we have in the city of Vancouver estimated in 2024 to have 745,984 people. That is 24.3% of the population of Metro Vancouver. So in terms of land mass, we're minuscule. In terms of population, it's pretty considerable. And Vancouver is the most densely populated city in all of Canada. So that makes sense, right? It's this relatively small area with a lot of people for the region. Second most populous area aside from the city of Vancouver is the city of Surrey, and then comes Burnaby, and then comes Richmond. So those 4 cities carry most of the population in Metro Vancouver. Many of the other municipalities surrounding Vancouver are much less dense. This is important to understand because I think when people get too focused on the city of Vancouver, they kind of miss out on so many different opportunities, and the lifestyles that are offered in different municipalities and different parts of Metro Vancouver are pretty diverse. And so you're missing out on amazing places such as Port Moody, Burnaby, Richmond, Tawasin, Mission, Chilliwack even, if you want a totally different lifestyle. But what I find, so many people get too focused on the city of Vancouver. This is the area that is going to be the most expensive. It's essentially the city core, the region's core. And where land is expensive, of course, it's going to be most expensive at the core of that area, where the most amenities are, where everybody wants to be. And so if that is a concern for you, or if you just don't want an urban environment, like too many people think that all you're going to get in Vancouver is an urban experience, and that's not the case. If you move out to Chilliwack, it's a very different lifestyle than it is in the city of Vancouver, or Mission is very different, or Abbotsford, or Tawasin for that matter. So all of these areas offer very different things. And if you're not really looking for a Vancouver lifestyle, or perhaps not a Burnaby lifestyle, this region can offer you so much more than just the city of Vancouver. And I think that's a really important thing to understand. And it's really critical that if you're moving here, you don't get too focused on being in the city of Vancouver, where it's going to be the most expensive. And it's a very specific type of experience. And that is not the experience that everybody has that lives in Metro Vancouver, because it's a very diverse area with 21 different municipalities in it. Every single one of them feels different and is attractive to different types of people. And point number 2 is you really don't need a car when you move to Vancouver. And specifically now, I am talking about the city of Vancouver and its kind of immediate suburbs. But these are the areas where the center of the population is. And these areas are incredibly well served by public transit and other alternative modes of transport. Things like car shares and bike shares and Uber and of course, public transit like the SkyTrain or an excellent bus system, even the C bus between North Vancouver and downtown Vancouver. But there's so many options, and so many areas in Metro Vancouver, not just the city of Vancouver, are actually really walkable. Like if you live in the town center in Port Moody, or if you live in downtown Vancouver, or if you live in Coquitlam Center or Burquitlam, those are areas that can be incredibly walkable, and you don't actually need to have a car to live in them. It makes it a whole lot easier to live without a car if you do decide to live along the SkyTrain route. That is sort of the most efficient and effective mode of transport between one region, and sort of relatively short hops between one municipality and the other municipality. It's highly effective and fantastic for commuting. But the truth is, Vancouver is one of the only cities in North America where you can truly live without a car. I mean, you might think of Toronto as being, living in downtown Toronto as that being a possibility, New York City as being a possibility. And then really the list gets really, really short after those two. And Vancouver would be at the very high end of the next step down in the quality of transit and the quality of life that you can have without owning a car. And that is one way that it can actually be a more affordable place to live than many other cities, because you really don't need to have a car. I should point out, though, the reliance on automobiles, as we were talking about in the last point, if you aren't living in the city of Vancouver and you are deciding to live in a further, more distant suburb, it is more likely that you're going to need a car, and the alternative modes of transport become less convenient. So if you do decide to live in Mission or in Chilliwack or in Abbotsford, you are more likely to need a car than you are deep in the city of Vancouver or its immediate surrounding suburbs. All right, be sure to stick around to the very end, because I'm going to give you one bonus tip that's going to alleviate all sorts of stress and anxiety if you're moving to Vancouver and this is a totally new experience, moving to the big city. But before we get there, one more thing that you really need to know before you move here, no matter whether you're buying or renting, but so often the transition for people is moving here and renting for a little while first. The thing is, when you do that, there are no professionals that help you locate a home. There are no realtors that do that. There's no other kind of professional that will help a tenant in the landlord-tenant relationship. I don't know why that is. To be honest, I think it's a bit of a failing in our system. But the reality is, if you move here and you're planning on renting first, you're kind of on your own. In so many other markets, there are professionals that represent tenants and help them source a place and represent them in that negotiation between the landlord and the tenant. That does not happen in Vancouver. As a result, before you move here, you need to do some really diligent research. And you're going to find that when you move here, most of the time, it's the owner themselves or the landlord that you're directly dealing with. Very rarely, we do have property managers, but very rarely are they involved. They are going to be involved if it's an apartment building that you're renting in. So if it's, a 100-unit apartment building, well, whether it's a corporation or an individual that owns that building, they will have hired a property manager. But so much of our rental stock is actually individually owned. It's sort of those mom and pop investors who might own 1, 2, or 3 condos, maybe, or it's a family that owns a house and they're renting out their basement suite. And that's something that I do myself, and I do not hire a property manager. I do that myself because it's easy. I know that the rental market in Vancouver the vacancy rate is relatively low, and it's not really hard to find a tenant, and it's not really difficult. They're not problematic. Plus, the rents are as expensive as it can feel that renting is. The rents are not so high that people feel like there's enough money there to pay a professional on an ongoing basis. For that reason, many owners decide to rent properties themselves and handle it themselves. And so the place that you're going to find the majority of rental properties, if you're looking for a place to rent, short term, if you're coming here to purchase a place, you're going to want to look at a place like Airbnb or VRBO. And that can be a stopgap measure for a month or 2 months or 3 months while you're looking for a place. But then the alternative, if you're looking for long-term rents, you're going to want to look at websites like Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, and Kijiji. Those are the 3 places that, whether they're being rented out by the owner themselves or a property manager, that's almost always, those are the websites that you're going to find them on. Any other websites are generally sort of aggregators that pull information from a bunch of different websites. Now, there are also some listings on MLS. They've added them to the MLS in the last couple of years. However, once again, I just want to make sure that you know realtors will not help you in sourcing those properties. They will be representing the landlord in those situations, but they will not give you representation if you're the tenant. They'll basically just sort of, their client is the landlord and not the tenant. So be careful when you're looking for property, when you're looking to rent specifically. Unfortunately, there's no professional guidance for you. There is just a whole lot of information on YouTube and on my channel. And I am going to point out there is a video that I want you to watch if you are thinking of renting in Vancouver. Check out this video I did a little while ago all about what it's like to rent in Vancouver. That's going to give you very specific guidance. And if you are moving here and thinking of purchasing a home, well, I'm a real estate agent that doesn't handle rentals, but I do help people buy and sell property in Vancouver. I've helped hundreds of families just like yours settle in Vancouver, and I can help you as well. Reach out anytime, whenever you're ready. We can get that ball rolling, that conversation started. But for now, let's get back to the video. All right, so next we're going to talk about the weather. I'm going to start with rain, but we're going to talk about this in a more general context as well. But specifically, let's address precipitation. One of Vancouver's nicknames is Raincouver. So people associate Vancouver with a lot of rain, a lot of precipitation. And to be honest, I think a lot of that is a misconception. It's not actually the reality. And it does depend on where you're moving from. So yes, there are parts of the world where people get a lot less rain and get quite a bit more sun than we get here in Vancouver. There's no doubt about it. And I don't want to argue that point. But I think so many Canadians come to Vancouver from some of those areas. So for them, yes, absolutely. The amount of rain that you get in Vancouver can be quite startling. And if you're coming from our prairie provinces specifically, whether you're coming from Regina or Calgary or Edmonton, then yes, it's going to feel like Vancouver has a lot of rain because we do get considerably more rain than those places. But if you compare it to Toronto, yes, we get more rain, not considerably more, but a fair amount more. And then in comparison to Montreal, it's actually a pretty slight difference. And if you compare it to the Maritime provinces, most of the Maritimes get more precipitation annually than Vancouver does. And then if we put it in a global context, or even just a North American one, there's so many North American cities that get a lot more rain, or even just a little bit more rain than Vancouver does. Let's just name a few. There's Atlanta, there's Cincinnati, there's Miami, which gets quite a bit more rain. There's Nashville, there's New York, there's Houston, and there's Memphis. These are all cities that we don't really consider as being wet, rainy places, maybe other than, say, Miami. But on the whole, these aren't places that we associate with being incredibly wet. Yet Vancouver somehow gets associated for some reason, even though we're well below most of those cities. And even we're on par with some global cities like Sydney, Australia, Auckland, New Zealand. We get considerably less rain than Seoul, South Korea, and Shanghai in China. It's important, I think, to put it in context. Yes, we get rain, there's no doubt about it, but it's not like you're in some crazy atmospheric river, which we did have recently, all the time. And in fact, most of our rain is contained in the winter months. And most of that rain is sort of in the period of November to March. And we're in that period right now. It's the end of November. And frankly, it's been raining like on and off for a few days, and it's likely to continue. Right now, it's unusual to see the sun. You know, it's unusual for the clouds to break and for there to be no rain and for the sun to be beating down. And it's probably going to be that way for a while. And that is something that we have a fair amount of, and that is a lack of sunlight in the winter months. We sort of have gray cloud cover and the sun disappears for a while. But that is also why we have such a temperate climate. That is also why we live in such a lush environment. So why everything is green and why you don't have extremes in temperature. You know, our winters are relatively warm, and that is something that so many people who come here are really seeking. You are going to get a little bit more rain, but it's really confined to the winter months. And it really does depend on where you're coming from, how extreme that's going to feel. And when it does rain, it's not typically a torrential downpour. Mostly what we get is sort of a little bit of rain pretty consistently over the winter months. And then in the summer, it warms up. But again, we don't get as hot as much of the rest of Canada or even North America does. And in recent years, yeah, things have gotten a little bit hotter in the summers. And many people attribute this to global warming. So we can spend maybe a week to 2 weeks above the 30-degree point and that's Celsius in the summer months. But on the whole, that's pretty rare. I should point out it does also depend where you are in Metro Vancouver, because the closer you are to the ocean, the more likely that's going to be more tempering in terms of how hot it gets. And so the further away you get, the more you get into the Fraser Valley, the hotter the summer can be. Areas like Abbotsford or Chilliwack can get considerably warmer than the city of Vancouver, as an example. So something to be aware of. But getting back to precipitation, in the summer months, we're actually one of the places in Canada that gets the least amount of rain. So that just goes to show you that how much precipitation happens in the winter months and how concentrated it is there. And then much of the rest of the year, sort of late spring to early fall, you go through a period where there's very little rain. And the rainfall, is the occasional storm. We don't really have lightning storms in Vancouver. There's no enormous thunderstorms with massive downpours of rain in the summer months, which you can have in other areas. No hurricanes, no typhoons, nothing like that. So to a large degree, we don't really get extremes of temperature, of weather, and sort of dangerous weather events that to a large degree. I mean, we did have something recently called, which they're terming an atmospheric river, which had some bad repercussions for some of the areas on mountainsides, like in North Vancouver and Coquitlam. But that sort of thing isn't super common, and definitely not as extreme as what can happen in some other places. So this next point I'm calling location matters. And the truth is, no matter where you move, obviously where you are in that area does make a difference. But I think it's a greater difference in Vancouver. And if you're moving here from somewhere else, this isn't going to be self-evident. You don't understand it unless you live here. And you don't understand it even if you live here unless you know what it's like to live in other places. And so Vancouver, very specifically, as I said, is just one small part of Metro Vancouver. And Metro Vancouver is so large and so diverse. And we're separated by rivers and ocean, and there's mountains to one side and an open valley on another side. And so the experience of living in all these different places, whether you're in Abbotsford or in Mission or in Tawasin or in Port Moody or in the city of Vancouver, all of those areas are incredibly different. And let me bring this home by talking again about the weather. But as I said, so many people have this fixed idea that Vancouver is a place where it rains all the time. But the reality is it doesn't. Depending on where you live, you could actually live in an area of Vancouver that gets very little rain. So Tawasin, as an example, gets just 900 millimeters of rain. The city of Vancouver gets closer to 1,200 millimeters of rain. And then Abbotsford gets about 1,500 millimeters of rain. And that's further out in the valley. And then the city of North Vancouver gets close to 2,350 millimeters of rain. So that's almost double what we get in the city of Vancouver, yet it's, 12 kilometers away. Like, everything is so close together, but the geographic environment is so different that your experience living in these different areas will be totally different. And so there's people who live in North Vancouver who are like, yeah, absolutely, Vancouver sucks, it rains all the time. And then people in Tawasin who say, Vancouver, it's beautiful weather, it's sunny all the time, it never rains. What are you guys talking about? So it really does depend on where you settle. And if you're looking for a place where it's a more temperate rainforest environment, well, I've got the perfect place for you. It's Lynn Valley in North Vancouver. But if you want a drier beach community experience, well, try Boundary Bay in Tawasin and Delta. There's a spot for everyone, and it really does matter what's important to you and where you end up settling in Vancouver as a result. I mentioned this as I was introducing this point, but Vancouver really is divided quite a bit by its waterways. And the Metro Vancouver area has 36 tunnels and bridges. That's absolutely insane. That just gives you an idea of how separated we are across the region by waterways. And it's also the ocean and the rivers, and it's primarily the Fraser River, because Vancouver and Metro Vancouver is at the mouth of the Fraser. British Columbia's largest river comes right out where we've all settled. And that river and all its tributaries sort of separates us in so many ways. And this is a point, I think, where it's really important. You can look at a map and you can see, oh, that place is 5 kilometers from this other place, and it might look like that commute is really easy. But if you're on one side of the Dease Tunnel and you live on one side and you work on the other side, I can tell you those 5 kilometers can be a torturous experience to travel between, because most likely transit isn't going to be an option. I mean, you could take a bus, but there's no SkyTrain there. And you're going to be reliant on the car, and the bridge gets clogged up all the time. And so a commute that should take you 15 minutes, 20 minutes on paper as the crow flies might take you an hour and a half on bad days when the tunnel is backed up. And that's the experience no matter where you are. So you really want to think carefully about where you're living and what are the things that are important to you. Maybe you don't need to commute, but maybe you love being in the mountains. Well, living in, I don't know, North Delta might not make sense if you're working from home, but you want to be up in the mountains all the time. If you want to do that, maybe you should be looking at areas like Coquitlam or Port Moody or North Vancouver. Maybe those are areas that you should be considering so that you don't have to worry about the commute to and fro all the time. The other thing you want to be aware of is your proximity to transit, and specifically rapid transit. And there is a big difference between taking a bus and taking the SkyTrain or the Sea Bus or the West Coast Express. And I find I get a lot of inquiries from people who seem to see both options as feasible. And I think you don't really understand how different the experience can be unless you're actually here. And so it's not the same to be on a bus route as it is to be on the SkyTrain route. A SkyTrain coming from on a SkyTrain from New Westminster or from Surrey into Vancouver is so much more a pleasant experience than jumping on a bus. And feeling like you're within bus distance of the SkyTrain might feel adequate to you not being here boots on the ground, but it can be a really miserable experience if you have to be out in the middle of winter when it's cold, dark, and raining, standing on the street corner waiting for your bus, and you got to drive that bus 45 minutes or 30 minutes to where the SkyTrain is going to pick you up, and from there getting somewhere else. So increasingly, the proximity to SkyTrain is becoming something that more and more people are realizing is a lifesaver and making life just incredibly more convenient. Even if you have a vehicle, even if most of the time you want to drive. And I personally am in that situation. You know, we have 4 children. My work also requires me to have a car available. Many of my clients will want me to drive them. Many times I need to move from one spot to another where there is no transit very quickly. And so my life revolves around having a car. I'm probably going to have a car for a very long time. And going back to those children, I mean, of course I need to ferry them from, or we need to ferry them from one place to another. So I can't really get by without a vehicle, unfortunately. But even us, we find we use public transit. My wife and I went to the Grey Cup a couple weeks ago. And when the Grey Cup was in town, like we didn't want to drive our car downtown. We made an effort to get to the SkyTrain, which isn't technically really walkable distance for us. I would say it might take us about 20 minutes to walk there, but we can take an Uber to get to the SkyTrain and then take the SkyTrain downtown, or we can take a car share over to the SkyTrain, which is what we did. And then we can be downtown and not have to worry about parking and just how crazy expensive parking downtown, especially for events. In fact, I think I heard for Taylor Swift, like parking for the event is something like $150 just for the event, when for a Canucks game, it might be $30 or $40. So there is sort of this, what do they call that? I can't think of the word, but how they balloon pricing depending on the demand, right? Definitely something you need to be aware of. And so just being close to the SkyTrain makes life so much easier. And so many people that are moving here from somewhere else, or people that already live here, are prioritizing that proximity because it can be really inconvenient to live further away from it. Maybe not as part of your daily life, but sort of in those extraordinary moments, like going to the Grey Cup or going out on a date night, or your kids going out to meet their buddies. It's just a lot easier when you're on rapid transit. And I did also mention the West Coast Express. It's a lot easier if you want to live in the suburbs, if you want to spend time, like in a more rural environment, absolutely. But you still probably are moving here for some degree of connection to the city. And so the cities that are along the West Coast Express, like Port Moody or Mission or Maple Ridge, those are places that I think are more convenient places to live. Because if you want it, it's there and you can get into the city quite easily. I think it's really critical to understand just how important a work-life balance is to people in Vancouver. I think it's a very common denominator for so many people that choose to move here. This isn't a place where you're going to make the most money possible. You can do very well in Vancouver. There are lots of financial opportunities, despite what people online comment on my videos. The reality is, yes, you can make good money in Vancouver, and we do have a very strong economy, in particular with sort of like the white-collar jobs, right? Highly skilled, highly educated people that are driven can do well in Vancouver. But not only is it probably more challenging than places like Toronto or Calgary or New York City or LA to make money, but it's also more expensive than many of those places or many of the other places in North America and in the world. So most people are sacrificing some degree of income, and then they're also sacrificing expense. They're spending more money to be here. And so why would you move here? Well, the answer is because of that work-life balance. And that's what people are really motivated to live here by. If that's not something that's motivating you, you may want to reconsider moving to Vancouver. So what you're going to find is many people are incredibly active. There's people who are going to be very fit, exercising all the time, something that connects a lot of people. The communities of people is quite often what your physical activity is, whether it's running or mountain biking or kiteboarding or dog walking. So many people in Vancouver are really highly motivated to be active and fit. And this is also in a Canadian context, this is the place where you can be active all year round. It's possible to do that in the winter months as well as the summer months. It's not too cold in the middle of winter usually, and it's not too hot in the middle of summer. So if you want to be outdoors all the time, this is a place where you can do it. Incidentally, very anecdotally, I almost moved to Houston when I graduated university, and I thought, oh my God, Houston's going to be amazing. I'm going to love living there because I love being outdoors, and I am looking forward to potentially living in a place where it is warm all year round. And I was interviewed in the middle of summer in August, I think it was, late July, early August. And I remember arriving there and nobody was on the streets. And it occurred to me as I experienced a few days in Houston, they have the opposite extreme as Regina, Saskatchewan does in the winter months. Nobody's outside in the middle of winter in Saskatchewan for long or of their own volition because it's too cold. In Houston, they have the opposite extreme in the summer months. You can die in the middle of summer. You should not be outside sweating and working hard. In Vancouver, you can do that whether it's the middle of winter or the middle of summer, any time of year. We have access to the outdoors. So the people who really want that experience are driven to be here. And it's not just physical, it's also mental, whether it's meditation or yoga or spirituality in some way. All those things are very important to a lot of people that settle in Vancouver. And then also just what you consume. And so nearby where I live, I'm not personally a vegetarian, but there are a number of great vegetarian restaurants near where I live. And it seems like more and more open all the time. To be honest, I'm always a little bit disappointed when they open because I'm like, that's not my food, right? But there's so many people, if you're celiac, if you're a vegetarian, if you're a pescatarian, whatever your dietary restriction or dietary bent or desire is, you can find it here in Vancouver. And the quality is incredibly high. So just understand when you move to Vancouver, work-life balance is something that most people prioritize and they share in that prioritization. And it's not a place where making money is a priority for as many people. And so that's something to be aware of when you're moving to Vancouver. Okay, so let's talk about friends. And I've talked about this in videos about Vancouver, about the downsides of living in Vancouver before. I do think it's a bit of a misconception that it's tough to make friends in Vancouver. I've lived here my entire life. I went away to university for 5 years. I've traveled around the world. I've done a lot of traveling. And yes, there are other places where it does seem to be easier to make friends. You do need to think about what the context is for you personally. Where do you come from? How old are you? How old were you in that other place? It's too easy to blame Vancouver. The truth is most Vancouverites come from somewhere else. Most of us are immigrants. Most of us weren't born here. At the end of the day, we're all people from somewhere else. I think part of the issue when you come to Vancouver is that there are parts of Vancouver where people can feel transitory. And so if you live in the West End, as an example, or if you live in a big condo building with lots of rentals in downtown Vancouver, it's probably going to feel harder to make friends because the people who are kind of settled there are going to have been burned. Their neighbors are moving in and out all the time. And so people come and live for 6 months, 3 months, and then they move on. But to be honest, where I live in sort of on the outskirts of downtown Vancouver in a single family residential area. The people here are settled and there's families. And I moved into this house, I think about 13 years ago. And I'm one of the more recent people on this block. I think 2 other houses in this block have sold since I have moved in here. So that gives you an idea of how settled this neighborhood is. And it's an incredibly welcoming neighborhood. People are so friendly. We have block parties. There are holiday parties. Kids play in the street. That is the experience that you can have in Vancouver. And if you are finding it challenging to make friends, I think part of the reason is because you might be living in a more transitory area. I think it's going to be a little more challenging in areas where there's a higher percentage of people who don't speak English as a first language. More recent immigrants may have a harder time communicating, and so that might be a barrier to making friends as much. But my experience of Vancouver is if you want to make friends, you can make them. There is nothing unusual about Vancouver that makes it a place where people are just rude to one another or don't want to connect. This is a place where you can make friends if you want to. Smile, start conversations with people, join a club, get hobbies, and participate in the community. And those are ways that I think you're going to find it ends up being fairly easy to connect. It also becomes a lot easier to connect with other people if you have a dog or if you have children. And I have had both in my life and have gone through periods where I haven't had either. And I definitely feel like it becomes a lot easier to connect with other families when you have children of your own. And you're also spending more time outdoors and doing things. When I was single, I would say and concentrating on a career, it was a little more challenging for me. And then I remember having a dog and then walking my dog through the neighborhood and slowing my life down a little bit and connecting with my neighbors a little more. And then also going to dog parks and hanging out with other people with dogs, right? So those things expanded my personal social circle, making an effort and carrying conversations and smiling at people and saying hello and asking them questions. All really basic kind of social skills, but for some people, apparently it's not self-evident. But I do strongly believe that it's possible to make friends in Vancouver, and that frankly, it's not a place where it's particularly difficult. There's just some reasons, certain pockets, you may find it a little more challenging than other pockets of Metro Vancouver. So I did promise you one bonus that's going to save you all sorts of anxiety and stress when you move to Vancouver, and that's how you don't get lost. Let me tell you the secret how not to get lost in Vancouver. That is, look for the mountains. Wherever you are in the city of Vancouver and most of its suburbs, most of Metro Vancouver, if you look up and you see mountains, big walls of mountains, that is north. So as long as you know the cardinal directions, never eat shredded wheat, you can figure out where to go. It has saved me so many times when I'm in an area that I don't really know in Metro Vancouver that I know all I need to do is look for the mountains, and that is north. It also, frankly, confuses me when I'm in cities that don't have mountains around them or some obvious geographic feature. I actually get lost pretty easy. I always thought I have a really good sense of direction, but no, it's just because I know this secret, as most Vancouverites do, that the mountains are to the north, and so you can always find your home. If you are looking for other secrets all about Metro Vancouver and need help buying a home when you're moving to Vancouver, maybe you already live here. Well, I've helped hundreds of families find the right home, find the right community, and I can help you and your family as well. My contact information is right there on the screen, and feel free to reach out whenever you are ready. There's absolutely no pressure, never any pressure. All it is a conversation, and we can figure out whether we're a good fit and whether I can help you find your next home here in Vancouver. But if you're not quite ready to do that, well, I do suggest checking out my dozens and dozens of videos all about moving to and living in Vancouver. I put out videos just like this one every single week, and I really do think this is a great resource for anybody in Vancouver or moving to Vancouver. So be sure to check out all those videos. And before you leave, there is a video I would love to meet you on, and it's this video right here. That's all about current cost of living in Vancouver. And if you're thinking of moving here, that's a really important video to be checking out and making sure that all of that aligns with your current budgets. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you sticking around all the way to the end. I'll see you next week.